What if the most expensive part of New York is not what you buy, but what you are never warned about? Before you even reach your hotel, before your first coffee, before your first photo, the city has already started charging you in ways that feel invisible but are absolutely mandatory. This is the moment where the myth cracks. New York sells itself as an open city, a global playground, a place where everything is possible. But beneath that image lives a carefully engineered system of extraction, designed to turn every visitor into a predictable source of revenue, not an invited guest. Most people arrive believing prices are high but manageable. Hotels look expensive, meals look costly, tickets seem inflated. What shocks them is not the price tag they saw online, but the cascade of unavoidable costs that appear only after commitment. Fees that are not optional. Taxes that stack on top of taxes. Surcharges that arrive without explanation. The city does not ask permission. It assumes compliance, and this assumption is built into every layer of the tourist experience. The first psychological trick is normalization. Everything feels official, automated, justified. A line item here, a small percentage there. Individually, none of them look outrageous. Together, they form a system that quietly drains hundreds, sometimes thousands, without triggering immediate resistance. That is the brilliance of it. New York does not scam through deception alone. It scams through complexity, through fatigue, through the social pressure to keep moving and not question what feels institutional. This is not about one bad restaurant or one overpriced taxi. This is about a city that has learned how to monetize confusion. Tourists are temporary. They do not vote. They rarely complain effectively. And they are emotionally invested in the idea that this is normal, that this is just how New York works. Admitting you are being overcharged feels like admitting you did not understand the city, so most people stay silent and keep paying. What makes this system especially powerful is how early it begins. Airports, transportation, accommodation, food, attractions, even basic necessities are designed to introduce mandatory costs before you feel settled enough to push back. By the time frustration appears, you are already locked in. Schedules are tight. Reservations are made. Leaving is not an option. Compliance becomes easier than resistance. This is where the tourist scam becomes cultural, not criminal. It is protected by branding, by reputation, by decades of storytelling that frames New York as expensive but worth it. That phrase is the key. Worth it. It discourages scrutiny. It reframes financial pressure as part of the authentic experience. And once you accept that logic, the city can charge almost anything, as long as it feels standardized. As we move forward, the real question is not how much New York costs, but why so many of these costs are unavoidable, poorly explained, and aggressively normalized. Because once you start listing them one by one, a very different picture emerges. A picture that has less to do with tourism and much more to do with a city that has learned how to extract value from attention, urgency, and silence. If this already sounds uncomfortable, that reaction matters. This is exactly the kind of system most people experience but never stop to fully understand. And understanding is the first form of protection. If you have ever visited New York, or if you are planning to go, pause for a second and reflect on what you are hearing here. These hidden costs are not accidents. They are part of a structure that only works because people do not question it. This is why your engagement is important. Leaving a comment is not just interaction. It is how these patterns stop feeling isolated and start looking systemic. If you have been to New York, write "I felt this," or describe one cost that surprised you. If you have not been yet, comment "still worth it," and let others respond with their real experiences. This conversation exposes what glossy travel guides never show. If this perspective is adding clarity instead of selling fantasy, support the video with a like so more people can see it before they fall into the same trap. And subscribe to the channel, because this is not just about New York. It is about how modern cities quietly turn visitors and residents into revenue streams, while calling it normal life. The real shock does not arrive with a bill you can argue over. It arrives quietly, in fragments, spread across moments that feel too small to fight. The second you step into New York, you enter a world of unspoken charges, rules nobody explains, and payments that feel automatic rather than negotiated. This is where most tourists lose control without realizing it. Nothing dramatic happens, no alarm goes off. The system works precisely because it feels mundane. It starts with movement. Transportation prices look clear on paper, yet almost immediately become something else in practice. Add-on fees, airport surcharges, peak pricing logic, and the constant pressure to choose speed over cost. Every decision is framed as convenience versus time, never as transparency versus exploitation. And because you are unfamiliar, tired, and trying to keep plans intact, you default to what seems reasonable. That default is expensive. Then comes the first psychological twist. You begin blaming yourself. You assume you missed something obvious. Maybe this is how big cities work. Maybe you are just inexperienced. That self-doubt is essential to the system. A confused visitor is less likely to question a receipt, challenge a fee, or slow down long enough to calculate what is happening in aggregate. Confusion becomes compliance. What follows is normalization through repetition. Charges repeat so often that they lose their emotional impact. Taxes stacked on top of taxes. Tips that are not suggestions but expectations. Service charges presented as standard, unavoidable, and morally loaded. Each one is small enough to tolerate. Together, they form a constant drip that reshapes your perception of money. Spending becomes reactive instead of intentional. You stop asking how much, you start asking how fast. Midway through the day, another shift occurs. You realize the city is not expensive only in landmarks or luxury spaces. It is expensive in basic survival. Water. That costs more than a meal elsewhere. Bathrooms that require payment or negotiation. Places designed to move you along quickly, not welcome you. This is not accidental. When comfort disappears, urgency increases. And urgency is profitable. Here is the deeper layer most people never articulate. These costs are not hidden in the sense of being secret. They are hidden because they are fragmented. No single place presents the full picture. No guide warns you about the cumulative effect. And by the time you mentally connect the dots, you are already invested emotionally, financially, and temporally. Leaving feels like failure. Staying feels like justification. At this point, frustration often turns inward. People joke about it. They post ironic photos. They tell themselves the story they were sold before arriving, that this is part of the authentic New York experience. That rationalization is the final lock. Once you accept discomfort as cultural identity, the system no longer needs to explain itself. And yet, this is only the surface. Because the moment you step into your accommodation, a whole new layer of mandatory costs begins revealing itself, often framed as standard policy rather than choice. This is where many travelers realize too late that the biggest surprises were waiting behind closed doors. Accommodation is where the illusion of control finally collapses. By the time you reach your hotel or rental, you believe the major expenses are already accounted for. The room was booked weeks ago. The price looked painful but clear. What most visitors do not realize is that the nightly rate is only the invitation fee. The real costs begin after check-in, hidden behind policy language, fine print, and a tone that implies there is nothing to discuss. This is where mandatory fees appear dressed as normal procedure. Resort fees that have nothing to do with resorts. Destination fees that do not offer destinations. Facility charges that provide nothing you asked for. These are not optional services. They are structural add-ons designed to bypass price comparison and reduce resistance at the booking stage. Once you are physically there, tired and committed, these fees stop being negotiable and start being inevitable. The psychological mechanism here is subtle but powerful. Hotels know that confrontation is socially uncomfortable, especially when framed as policy. A front desk agent does not argue. They recite. The language is calm, rehearsed, and final. You are made to feel that questioning the charge is pointless or naive. Most people comply not because they agree, but because they want the interaction to end. Then comes taxation layering. City tax, state tax, occupancy tax, local surcharges. Each one sounds legitimate on its own. Together, they inflate the final cost far beyond what the booking site displayed. This is not an accident of bureaucracy. It is a pricing strategy that relies on fragmentation. If all of it were shown up front, many people would not book. So it is revealed in stages, when exit costs are higher than compliance. At this stage, something emotional shifts. The room is smaller than expected. The noise is constant. The comfort feels conditional. Yet the price keeps climbing. You begin realizing that you are paying premium rates for scarcity, not quality. For location, not livability. This realization is uncomfortable because it contradicts the promise you bought into. And instead of confronting that contradiction, many people internalize it. They lower expectations. They tell themselves this is just how New York is. Here is the deeper truth. Accommodation in New York is not designed to host. It is designed to cycle. Rooms are optimized for turnover, not rest. Policies are optimized for revenue capture, not clarity. The city does not need you to feel welcome. It needs you to pass through efficiently while leaving as much money behind as possible. Once you understand this, the experience stops feeling personal and starts feeling systemic. And this system does not end when you leave the building. It follows you into every meal, every coffee, every place you sit down expecting a break. Because food, in New York, is not just sustenance. It is another layer of extraction that feels social, unavoidable, and morally pressured. Food is where many visitors finally feel the pressure become personal. Eating in New York is not just expensive, it is structurally designed to remove choice, while maintaining the illusion of freedom. Menus look simple. Prices appear high but acceptable. What comes later is the real shock. Taxes are added, tips are assumed, surcharges appear without warning, and suddenly the number you agreed to no longer exists. The first layer is expectation management. In most places, a tip is a response to service. In New York, it is a moral obligation embedded into the price without being included in it. You are not asked whether the service earned it. You are asked how much guilt you can tolerate. Suggested tips appear on screens, already inflated, already calculated after tax, already framed as the socially correct choice. Opting out feels like a violation, not a decision. Then come the service charges that pretend to solve the tipping problem while actually duplicating it. Kitchen appreciation fees, staff wellness surcharges, operational adjustments. These are presented as ethical improvements, but they rarely replace tipping. They stack on top of it. The customer pays more, the system becomes more confusing, and accountability disappears into abstraction. Midway through your trip, another realization sets in. Eating out is no longer about enjoyment. It is about calculation. You scan menus defensively. You avoid sitting down. You choose faster options not because you want to, but because the emotional cost of another surprise bill feels heavier than hunger. This is a critical turning point. When food becomes stressful, the city stops, feeling alive and starts feeling hostile. Here is the twist most people miss. These costs are not accidental side effects of inflation or labor shortages. They are part of a tourism economy that treats meals as predictable extraction points. Tourists eat out more. They lack local knowledge. They are less likely to contest charges. The system adapts to that behavior and reinforces it. Over time, transparency becomes unnecessary. Another emotional shift happens quietly. You begin rationalizing again. You tell yourself the food is worth it, that this is the price of culture, that complaining makes you look cheap or ungrateful. This social pressure is crucial. It keeps the system intact without force. No one needs to defend the price when customers defend it for them. By this point, many visitors feel constantly on edge. Every meal feels like a test. Every receipt feels like a reveal. And yet, this is still not the most aggressive layer of mandatory spending. Because the moment you try to move through the city efficiently, especially through its gateways and infrastructure, the costs escalate again. Often faster than you expect. Transportation is where the city's logic becomes brutally clear. Nothing in New York ever costs what it initially promises, especially when movement is involved. The system is built around urgency, not clarity. You are always late, always navigating crowds, always trying to make something on time. That pressure quietly removes your ability to calculate, compare, or resist. At first glance, public transport looks affordable. A subway ride seems cheap. A weekly pass feels reasonable. But almost immediately, reality intervenes. Trains are delayed, rerouted, overcrowded, or suspended without warning. Suddenly, what was supposed to be a simple trip becomes a chain of decisions under stress. Wait and lose time, or pay more and move faster. Most people choose speed, and the system knows it. Taxis, ride-sharing, airport transfers, tolls, and surcharges operate on the same principle. Prices fluctuate, fees stack, and explanations are minimal. Airport fees appear after the ride. Bridge tolls are added later. Peak pricing activates when demand is highest, which is exactly when tourists need transportation the most. What looks like flexibility is actually dynamic extraction. Here comes another psychological shift. You stop planning efficiently and start reacting. You accept the expensive option because the cheaper one feels uncertain. Uncertainty is the enemy of tourists. And New York weaponizes uncertainty perfectly. Miss one connection and your entire day collapses. So you pay to prevent chaos, even when the cost feels unreasonable. Midway through the trip, something deeper sets in. Movement becomes exhausting, not physically, but mentally. Every transfer feels like a gamble. Every delay increases irritation. You are not just paying with money anymore. You are paying with attention, patience, and emotional energy. This is where the city begins to feel less like a destination and more like a test of endurance. What most visitors never articulate is that this infrastructure is not failing accidentally. It is saturated by design. Demand exceeds capacity, and that imbalance creates profit opportunities everywhere around it. When systems barely function, people pay for shortcuts. When shortcuts become normal, high prices feel justified. This is also where the experience becomes depersonalized. You are no longer a visitor exploring a city. You are a unit moving through bottlenecks. Gates, turnstiles, tunnels, checkpoints, terminals. Each one introduces friction, and friction is monetized. The airport especially stops feeling like a gateway and starts feeling like a warning. Delays, fees, overpriced basics, and constant announcements normalize stress as part of travel. By this point, many tourists feel strangely depleted, not just financially, but emotionally. The city demands constant attention and constant payment just to function, and this pressure does not come from luxury. It comes from basic movement and access. Which raises a disturbing question. If simply getting around costs this much in money and energy, what does that say about the city itself? Because once movement becomes stressful, even the smallest necessities start to feel like toll booths, and that is where the experience turns from expensive to oppressive. This is the stage where visitors realize that even stopping costs money. Resting, drinking water, using a bathroom, sitting down without obligation, all become small negotiations with the city. New York does not sell comfort. It rents permission. And that permission expires quickly unless you keep paying. What shocks most people is not a single outrageous charge, but the frequency of minor expenses that feel unavoidable. You are thirsty. Water is overpriced everywhere. You need a bathroom. Access is restricted, conditional, or tied to a purchase. You want to sit. Seating is scarce unless you are consuming something. Every pause requires a transaction. The city is not designed for presence. It is designed for flow. This creates a subtle but constant psychological pressure. You begin timing your needs around purchases. You stay longer than you want in places you did not plan to visit because leaving means spending again. This is not accidental. When basic human needs are monetized, people linger where they have already paid. Time stretches. Fatigue builds. Spending continues. Here comes another emotional turn. You stop feeling like a guest and start feeling like a resource being processed. The city does not acknowledge you unless money changes hands. Public space feels conditional. Private space feels transactional. And the line between the two becomes deliberately blurred. A coffee shop is not a place to rest. It is a temporary shelter with an entry fee. This is where many tourists experience a quiet internal conflict. They came expecting stimulation, energy, culture. Instead, they feel tension, vigilance, calculation. The joy of exploration gets replaced by cost awareness. Every choice carries financial consequences. Even choosing to do nothing has a price. What makes this especially effective is normalization. Locals move through this system with practiced efficiency. They know where to go, when to pay, when to avoid. Tourists do not, and the city does not slow down for them. This asymmetry is profitable. Confusion fuels spending. Familiarity reduces it. That is why clarity is never prioritized. Another layer emerges here. The constant low-level stress of micropayments begins reshaping perception. You start seeing the city not as a collection of places, but as a sequence of tolls. Each block, each stop, each break becomes another decision point where money leaks out quietly. This is how exhaustion sets in without a clear cause. And by the time this fatigue becomes conscious, something else is already happening in the background. The entire experience is being framed for you by images, marketing, and media that insist this is normal, exciting, even desirable. Which leads to the next layer of the scam. The theater that keeps the illusion alive while the pressure keeps rising. At this point, the contradiction becomes impossible to ignore. While your experience feels tense, expensive, and exhausting, the image of New York being sold around you remains flawless. Billboards promise excitement. Social media feeds overflow with perfect angles. Tourism campaigns show ease, glamour, and effortless enjoyment. This gap between image and reality is not accidental. It is the core mechanism that keeps the system running. The city operates like a stage set. Certain zones are polished, predictable, and heavily mediated. These are the spaces tourists are guided toward, both physically and psychologically. They are curated to perform normality. Crowds look energetic, not stressed. Prices look premium, not predatory. Delays look temporary, not structural. Everything is framed as part of the experience rather than a sign of strain. This is where the role of tourism becomes critical. Visitors are not just consumers. They are props. Their presence reinforces the illusion that the city is thriving, functional, and desirable. As long as people keep arriving, the narrative holds. And because tourists are temporary, the system does not need to care about long-term satisfaction. Discomfort is acceptable as long as it does not interrupt flow. Media plays a quiet but powerful role here. Films, shows, and online content rarely capture waiting, confusion, or exhaustion. They show movement without friction. They show consumption without cost. They show freedom without calculation. When real life contradicts that image, people assume the problem is personal, not structural. This self-blame protects the myth. Another psychological twist happens here. You start participating in the performance. You take photos that hide stress. You post highlights. You laugh about the prices. You tell people back home that it was intense but worth it. This is not dishonesty. It is social survival. Admitting disappointment feels like admitting failure to enjoy what you were promised to love. The city benefits from this silence. Complaints remain fragmented. Each visitor believes their frustration is unique or temporary. No single voice sounds loud enough to challenge the narrative. And because tourism is framed as privilege, not vulnerability, criticism feels inappropriate. Meanwhile, the infrastructure underneath continues to strain. Services age, systems saturate, costs rise. But the theater adapts faster than reality. As long as the image holds, the experience does not need to improve. The gap becomes the business model. This is the moment where the scam stops being financial and becomes psychological. You are no longer just paying money. You are paying to maintain belief. Belief in the dream. Belief in the story. Belief that this is how a global city should feel. And once belief becomes the currency, questioning becomes the threat. But this performance cannot hide everything. Because beyond the tourist zones and curated narratives, the city reveals its priorities clearly, and what it neglects tells a far more honest story. When you step slightly outside the curated paths, the illusion weakens fast. This is where the city's priorities become visible, not through slogans, but through neglect. New York presents itself as endlessly wealthy, yet struggles to maintain the most basic systems that support daily life. This contradiction is not subtle once you notice it. It is everywhere, embedded in cracks, delays, shortages, and improvisation. Public infrastructure feels permanently strained. Elevators in subway stations do not work. Escalators stall for weeks. Streets are patched instead of repaired. Trash piles up in ways that feel normalized rather than alarming. None of this looks temporary. It feels managed, tolerated, accepted. A city that charges premium prices delivers minimum reliability and somehow expects gratitude in return. This is where many visitors experience a deeper form of dissonance. You are paying luxury-level costs to move through environments that feel unfinished, overused, and poorly maintained. The mismatch creates irritation, but also confusion. How can so much money flow through a place that seems unable to care for its own foundations? The answer lies in where the money goes, and more importantly, where it does not. The city invests heavily in visibility, not durability. What tourists see matters more than what residents endure. Airports expand retail space faster than functionality. Transit systems advertise innovation while failing at consistency. Neighborhoods that generate revenue receive attention. Those that do not are quietly ignored. This is not incompetence. It is allocation. Here comes another turning point. You realize that the system does not aim to improve the experience. It aims to manage dissatisfaction just enough to prevent collapse. As long as things function at a barely acceptable level, the flow continues. Complaints become background noise. Frustration becomes ambient. And because nothing fully breaks, nothing truly gets fixed. This affects how people behave. Expectations lower, standards adjust. Locals develop survival strategies rather than demands. Visitors accept inconvenience as character. The city trains everyone to adapt downward. Over time, this normalization of dysfunction becomes cultural. People stop asking why things are broken and start asking how to work around them. The emotional cost of this is significant. When a place stops caring for the basics, it signals something deeper. It tells you that individuals are replaceable, that comfort is optional, that stress is assumed. This message is not delivered directly. It is absorbed through repetition, through daily friction, through the quiet understanding that no one is coming to fix this. And yet, the city continues marketing itself as the pinnacle of urban life. This contradiction is exhausting to hold, especially for visitors who came expecting intensity, but not erosion, energy, but not decay, ambition, but not neglect. By this stage, many tourists feel something close to betrayal, even if they cannot name it. The city promised more than it delivered, while charging far more than it explained. And for some, that realization triggers a final shift. The moment when staying stops feeling like exploration and starts feeling like endurance. Because when the basics fail and the costs keep rising, people do not leave because they want to. They leave because they have to. This is where the experience quietly flips from choice to escape. Most tourists do not announce this moment. It happens internally, often without words. A growing sense that staying longer will not add value, only cost more energy, more patience, more money. The excitement fades, curiosity narrows. The question becomes how soon you can leave without feeling like the trip was a mistake. What makes this moment uncomfortable is that it clashes with the story people were told to believe. New York is supposed to be overwhelming in a good way, fast but inspiring, expensive but rewarding. When the reality feels heavy instead of electric, many visitors interpret that as personal failure. Maybe they did not plan well enough. Maybe they chose the wrong neighborhoods. Maybe they just did not get it. That internalization protects the city from accountability. But if you look closely, a pattern emerges. People leave not because they are bored, but because they are depleted. The constant pressure to spend, decide, move, and tolerate friction drains emotional reserves. There is no rhythm of recovery built into the experience, No pause without payment. No calm without calculation. Over time, that absence becomes unbearable. This is also where comparison kicks in. Visitors start thinking about other cities, other trips, other places where money felt proportional to comfort, where infrastructure worked quietly, where basic needs were not monetized at every step. That comparison is dangerous for the New York myth, because it reframes the experience not as uniquely intense, but as uniquely extractive. Another realization surfaces here. The city does not seem concerned that people leave frustrated. Tourism numbers matter more than individual satisfaction. New arrivals replace departing ones seamlessly. The system does not depend on loyalty, it depends on volume. As long as the pipeline stays full, dissatisfaction can be absorbed and ignored. This logic explains something most people sense but rarely articulate. New York does not try to retain you emotionally. It tries to consume you efficiently. Your presence is temporary. Your money is immediate. Your exhaustion is irrelevant. Once that truth becomes clear, the experience shifts fundamentally. The city stops feeling personal and starts feeling industrial. And for many, this is the final break. Not anger, not outrage, but clarity. The understanding that what they experienced was not bad luck or poor planning, but a predictable outcome of a system optimized for extraction over hospitality. That clarity lingers longer than the photos, longer than the stories, longer than the souvenirs. Because once you see the pattern here, it becomes impossible not to notice it elsewhere. Other cities, other destinations, other places selling the same promise with slightly different branding. And that realization leads to the final and most uncomfortable question of all. If New York represents the future of global tourism, what does that say about where cities are heading next? By the end of the trip, something fundamental has shifted. New York no longer feels like a singular experience. It feels like a preview, a compressed version of a model that is quietly spreading across major cities worldwide. What once felt extreme, now feels instructional. The city becomes less a destination and more a warning sign. The most unsettling part is not how expensive New York is, but how normalized the extraction has become. Mandatory costs are framed as culture, stress is framed as energy, confusion is framed as authenticity, and anyone who questions this framing is subtly positioned as unprepared, unsophisticated, or unwilling to adapt. This is how systems protect themselves without force. At this stage, the tourist scam reveals its final layer. It is not designed to deceive individuals. It is designed to recalibrate expectations. Once people accept that this level of pressure is normal in a global city, other cities gain permission to follow. Airports copy the fees, hotels copy the policies, restaurants copy the surcharges. What began in New York becomes precedent. This is where the illusion of choice collapses completely. Visitors think they are choosing experiences, neighborhoods, restaurants, routes. In reality, they are choosing between different versions of the same extraction logic. Faster or cheaper, closer or calmer, but never transparent, never truly optional. The system offers variation, not escape. What makes this moment powerful is clarity. When the noise fades, many people realize the trip did not fail because expectations were too high, but because the promise itself was hollow. The myth of the city as a place of opportunity and excitement does not survive prolonged exposure to its mechanics, especially when those mechanics treat people as temporary revenue units rather than human beings. This is not about hating New York. It is about understanding it honestly. Cities reflect priorities, and New York's priorities are visible in what it charges for, what it neglects, and what it normalizes. The cost is not only financial, it is psychological. It trains people to accept friction, exhaustion, and constant payment as the price of being somewhere important. And that is why this matters beyond one trip or one city. Because once enough people internalize this model, the idea of urban life itself changes. Living, visiting, even resting become conditional. Access replaces belonging. Spending replaces participation. And the dream quietly dissolves into routine extraction. The real question left hanging is not whether New York is worth it, but how many cities will adopt this model before people stop calling it success. If you stayed until the end, it means something here resonated deeper than a travel complaint. It means you recognized a pattern, not just a city. And that awareness matters more than people think. If this video helped you see New York, and modern cities in general, with clearer eyes, support the channel by subscribing now. This channel exists to break the myths that marketing, media, and institutions keep selling as normal life. Leaving a like tells the algorithm this kind of analysis deserves space instead of fantasy. Before you go, leave a comment so this conversation does not stay silent. Write, "The dream is cracked," if this changed how you see big cities, or share one cost, moment, or feeling from New York that caught you off guard. Real experiences cut through illusion better than any statistic. And if you want to keep going, watch the next video appearing on your screen now. It connects directly to this one and shows how this same model is spreading far beyond New York.